Hi, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, thank you so very much for being a listener to the Public Relations Review podcast. I would really appreciate you leaving a review of the podcast. Let me know what you think. To make it easy, you can go directly to the podcast website, and that is publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can go directly to the review page to leave your review. So let me know what you think of the podcast. And again, thank you so very, very much for being a listener.
Welcome. This is the Public Relations Review podcast, a worldwide award-winning podcast. Our experienced guests cover a wealth of current, useful topics, including adapting to technological advancements, digital and AI matters, misinformation, media relations, fake news, crisis communications, and much, much more. And of course, your feedback is always welcome. Now, here is your host and producer, Peter Woolfolk.
Welcome to our listeners all across America and around the world. Now, Apple has ranked this podcast among the top 1% of podcasts worldwide, and Listen Score ranks the podcast as one of the top 10% most popularly monitored shows out of the 3.5 plus million podcasts globally. So thank you to all of our guests and listeners for your continued support. And if you enjoy the show, please leave a review. Now, question to my listeners. In public relations, we know that branding is the practice of using public relations strategies to shape, promote, and protect a brand's identity, reputation, and image among its key audiences. What are some of the important factors in developing a brand strategy, and why does that matter? My guest today specializes in strategic public relations and branding services. Now, as the principal of her firm, she focuses on innovative strategies to assist clients in enhancing their brand visibility and reputation. In addition, Brand News is a content creator and manages clients' online reputation. So joining me today from Mount Laurel, New Jersey is Alexandria. We'll just call her Alex for today. Alex Hammond. She is the principal of Brand News, and she is here to share her experiences and offer some guidance in these areas. Alex, welcome to the podcast.
Peter, I'm so happy to be here, and thank you for having me, and I'm looking forward to speaking with you further today.
Well, let's talk about brands. When you meet or have a new client, how do you go about establishing what their brand should be or should look like? What do you do with them?
So actually, when I have a client that approaches me and is looking forward, and there's always various services that we offer. So I'm an agency that offers obviously public relations, like you mentioned, and branding services, online reputation management, which often leads to like social media, digital marketing, website, things like that. So oftentimes when individuals or organizations, they come to me and say, hey, I want to do X, Y, and Z. I want to do public relations, and I want to do, I want my website to be better. All of those questions. Anytime, it doesn't matter who you are, what you've done, how long you've been in the game, whether you're a startup or if you've been around for a long period of time, I always say there's two questions that you absolutely need to ask yourself before you even figure out what your actual next steps are. So I always say, one, who are you? And two, why should people care? If you can kind of start there from the ground up, from ground zero, and being able to answer those two questions, I think we have a really good starting point. And I think that's super helpful, because a lot of times what happens is that companies don't really know who their brand is, or individuals don't really know what their brand is, and they don't really know which direction to go. So I love being able to kind of work with these people and say, like, okay, this is great. It's a blank canvas is kind of how I look at it. It's not a bad thing at all, but I love being able to kind of sit down and start from the beginning, just to make sure that we're all on the same page as far as what your brand is. So before we even get to the services part of being like, okay, great, we're gonna start promoting you, I like to, again, just kind of walk through that process in the beginning and kind of do some exercises to make sure that you as that person, as that company, exactly who your brand is and what your brand is.
So what sort of things are you looking for from them when you say what is your brand? What sort of information do you need to hear? What services they offer? How long they've been in business, what their philosophy is, just what sort of information are you trying to extract from them?
Absolutely. So Peter, usually I'm looking for clarity. So I'm not looking for anything that's too muddled. Like, again, I love being able to sit down and work through that process with them. But like you said, there are things that I am looking for. There's questions that I am asking. So absolutely, what is your mission statement? What is your vision statement? What are you looking to do? Who's your customer? Who's your audience? What do you see pie in the sky? Who are your competitors? Who do you see yourself lined up against? Again, whether you're a startup, whether you're an individual, whether you are a large company, all of these questions are pretty much the same, because again, it's like a brand is a brand and everyone has it, whether you're an individual or whether you have 1,000 employees, everyone has a brand. So again, it's really just getting to the nitty gritty, getting to the bottom, and just being like, let's answer these basic questions and making sure that you have that identified. And then it's fine if you don't, but again, then we have to work through that process. So again, getting your brand and understanding who you are and what you want to do, I think that's always a really good starting point before you even decide being like, well, I want to be on social media and I want to be on TikTok. And it's like, okay, well, does your brand lend itself to TikTok? Like, what are you doing that you feel like your brand would be successful here? So all these questions that we're kind of extracting, like you said, just to help these companies and help these people get to where they want to be. Because at the end of the day, it's like, you want to make sure you want to set everyone up for success. So again, identifying this from the beginning, the very first thing that before we do, is helpful for the long haul.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so now that you've collected this information, how do you go about assembling it to develop what that brand should be, what it should look like, how it's going to be presented from there? What do you do once you get all this information?
So one of the things I also like to say is, in short, like, go to where your audience and go to where your customer is, right? So if you know and you understand that your audience is a traditional audience. So when I say traditional, the fact is that maybe they're a little bit of an older demographic. So, okay, then going back to my point of like, well, is your audience on TikTok? Okay, so doing some kind of search, it's like, if your audience is, skews a little older, is your audience on TikTok? So maybe that doesn't lend yourself to that platform. Mm-hmm. Okay. So like figuring out, it's kind of like stepping back, because all the worst thing that you can do is spread yourself too thin as a brand. Okay. So again, it's kind of identifying those one or two or even three things that you do really, really well. And again, understanding who your audience is, and again, understanding who your customer is, because those are also two different things, and just ensuring that okay, this is where they are. I'm going to go to them. Don't have an ego that you think that they're just automatically going to come to you. Okay. So I always say that what's easier, and Peter, you tell me, is it easier for one person? And when I say one person, let's say one brand, there's 100 people sitting over there in the corner. Is it easier for you to go to them, right? Like one person, one brand, to go and walk over to that corner to meet them? Or is it easier to be like, tell 100 people to come over to you? You tell me what's easiest, mm-hmm. right? So I always try to just kind of simplify things a lot of times, because again, it's like, and you can understand this, if we had everyone who understood how we think as marketers, as brand specialists, as publicists, whatever kind of your background is, then we wouldn't have jobs, and we wouldn't be able to do what we do and, to love it so much. So I always say it sounds simple, right? But oftentimes, they don't understand that. So I always like making sure that it's simplified. Let's just make it really, really simple for them, mm-hmm. and being like, here's your audience, here's your customer. Let's just go to them, and we know how to reach them, and figuring out again, like what platforms, what mediums, is conducive for that.
Mm-hmm. Well, no, I certainly agree with you, because obviously there's some variation there, because if you've got something that's open to the general public, for instance, mm-hmm. I don't know, grocery store, for instance, or something like that, then, they can be just about anywhere, almost right. anywhere. Nothing for kids, because obviously kids aren't going to go there on their own, but mm-hmm. that gives you much larger targets to reach out in terms of platforms and other things like that to get information out.
Exactly. Yeah. And that's what I say too, again, it's one of the things, like it's I don't want to say that what we do is simple, and it does kind of take a special kind of person, people like you and I, who can kind of there's just something in our brains that, just like that switches, where it's just kind of like being able to think and thinking strategically. And I know, especially like considering your audience, right? They think like us. And oftentimes, like my favorite thing is being able to talk to a brand, a potential brand or a client who understands actually what we do. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying, when I say understand, there's a difference. I'm not saying that they know how to do, but they recognize and they realize the importance of what we do. So they understand, like, when we're asking these simple questions from the beginning, when we're first talking to them, when we're first vetting them, when we're first vetting their clients, and we're asking these questions, albeit they sound silly, but truthfully, it's so helpful. And I love, like, I always send my clients an onboarding sheet when I first start working with them. It's like, great, contract signed, here's an onboarding document. It is a pain in the butt, but once you kind of go through it, it's long when you kind of answer these questions. It's like I said, but it's going to set all of us up for success. And it ensures that we're all on the same page as far as what we want to do and how we all, like, what we all will be, like, what we deem success, you know? Mm-hmm. So I think doing things like that and being like, okay, like going back to what I said in the beginning, it's like, mission statement. Do you have a mission statement? Do you have a vision statement? Do you have a boilerplate? You know, what's your slogan? That's fine if you don't, you know, but making sure that, because sometimes, again, it'll kind of trigger things with, you know, your client saying like, oh, wow, you know, I don't have that. Oh, wow, we actually, that's great. That's something I didn't think about. We need to think about. And it's like, yeah, that's what we're here for. You know, we kind of think the big picture, but we also, you know, get to the small stuff that is super important, that seems unimportant, but is actually really, really important for us, you know, as marketers to do our jobs.
Well, as I listen to you, I mean, you're absolutely right about collecting all that information to help develop basically who they are and the image that they want to present. Then I guess the next step, you know, you want to get to is, once you have the shape and who we are and those sort of things, you have to begin to promote them. So what sort of avenues do you use to promote? And again, I'm sure that's going to depend upon what it is they do and who their audience is.
So I will say, one of the things I always I tell clients is, like, I truly believe in an integrated approach. So whether you're coming to my agency and you're just like, I want public relations, and that's fine. You're like, hey, we have a social media specialist, or we have a digital specialist. And I'm like, that's great, because we're still going to be working together. I find it very, very important that you can't work in a silo, anything that we do. So I always like to think of an agency as an extension of an organization, right? So sometimes if there's resources are limited, or they're like, hey, we're in a little bit of a pinch, we need someone. So all of those things, I, again, like to think of an agency as an extension. And I've been lucky enough that I've worked in-house and I've worked agency side, and obviously now having my own agency. But with that being said, I always say, I'll just use, for instance, if a client comes to me or a potential client comes to me for PR services, and I'm like, great. So typically what I do, and we all know, and that's a whole different conversation, is what does public relations, what does media relations, what does that look like for this particular client? Mm-hmm. So if we're going to go, again, the traditional route, you know, if it's something where you want to be in, you know, op-eds, you want to be a thought leader, you want to see yourself on, you know, television doing expert interviews, if you want to see yourself in print or digital editions doing interviews, all of that. So I will work with the client, again, identifying, one, what their niche is, again, what their industry is, making sure that it's, you know, hey, again, I always say this, the pie in the sky, where do you see yourself? How would you deem yourself the successful media campaign? Doing all of that to ensure, you know, and working with the client on different pitch angles, topics, staying relevant. This is the one thing about, you know, again, what we do, it's always about staying a step ahead. And not only a step ahead of, like, the client, but staying a step ahead of their competition and knowing what they're, like, what the competition is doing, because I think that's super important. And oftentimes, again, like, you know, what we do, there isn't really sometimes a clock in, clock out, especially if you want to be really, really good at it. But, you know, I'm lucky and I'm blessed that I enjoy what I do. So that's something that I kind of thrive on. But with that being said, now say, for instance, Peter, where we have a successful media campaign. And I think a lot of times where it's like, well, it doesn't just end there. So what are we doing? Because I always, again, I go back to, if the tree falls in the forest and nobody here, like, did it really happen? Mm-hmm. You know, or did it? So if we did all of this great work in the media, whether we're on TV, whether we're on print, but what if again, now we go back, did our audience see it? Did our potential customers see it? So working with our, you know, the digital or social team, just be like, hey, here's this really great piece that ran. How are we repurposing this? So working with them, it's like, are we sending out, do you have a digital newsletter? Do you have a website? What's your LinkedIn page? What's your Instagram page? Is this on your face? Like making sure that everyone sees it on every potential platform and you're repurposing it. Like, you know, because I think it's important, you know, because that's the thing is like being able to do a media and PR campaign, free earned media, that shows credibility. So this is just another piece, and it's another piece of content, which is important for social media and for digital. You need content, right, to put up. So here's a piece of content right here. So now we're repurposing this really great media piece for content. Maybe you're also doing sponsored posts, you know, putting a few dollars behind it so more people outside of your audience catch it. So it's like things like that, being able just to kind of work with them. Also important, one of the things that I love working with clients is doing kind of similar to what we're doing right now. Like plenty of people, we're in a space where it's podcasts. People love doing podcasts. People love talking. People love having their own personal platform. And especially since media, traditional media is changing, you know, now it's kind of like you got to create your own news and you got to create your own newsroom type thing. So I think working with that, creating videos, again, another piece of content. So it's like, okay, we have all this Rolodex of videos that we all put together. So now that we have these videos, what are we doing with it? And how are people seeing it? You know, so where is it going? Is it going on your YouTube? Again, is it going on your website? Here's content. And it's like, wow, we actually have 4 or 5 pieces of content now for our social media platforms. That's 5 pieces that we don't have to think about anymore because we did it, you know, like things like that. So I love, again, sitting down and just being able to figure out, like, it's not hard, but again, it's just figuring out like where what your platform is. You know, LinkedIn, I always say, and we all know, it's a little bit more buttoned up. So some content, that video content that you're going to do for LinkedIn isn't really going to perform as well maybe on Instagram. So it's also, again, realizing certain things aren't a copy paste. And I think brands also need to do that. Again, it goes back to what I said, if there's one person over here, 100 people over there, what's easiest? So just knowing and recognizing that as well, that what you do on LinkedIn may not do well on Instagram, may not do well on Twitter/X, may not also do well on Facebook.
Let me just add something in there right quick. A couple of things that you mentioned: thought leadership and videos.
Yeah.
Thought leadership can be tricky sometimes because people maybe see themselves as a thought leader, but, you know, what have you done? You know, thought leaders are, you know, they have to be respected. They have to have done something, and, you know, at certain levels, whether it's some good ideas, some projects you put together, public speaking, accomplishments that you have, those kinds of things. Just to say you want to be one because it sounds like it's a good idea is not enough. Thought leaders, people, you know, they can see through those kinds of things. You know, do you write editorials for your local newspaper? Do you write articles? Are you a public speaker? You know, first of all, what do people think of you as a person? If you don't have those kinds of credentials and personality, then that's not going to work very well. The other side of videos, I mean, I've had to repurpose videos as well. And, you know, you have to look very, very carefully at what it is. I did some work for the airport. We did an produced an in-house video for them that ran, I don't think, maybe about 15 minutes or maybe 10 minutes. But then they called us up a few weeks later on and said, look, we were going to this event and we want you to squeeze this thing down to 5 minutes. Oh, my heavens, you know, because it's just part of a presentation. Well, you know, we've got to decide, well, let's sit down and talk about what it is you want people to see. And then we have to rewrite a new script for the thing, you know, all those other kinds of things. So people have to understand all those things that go into, not necessarily the complexities of it, but how do you go about constructing the thing so it's a viable piece of to transmit who you are in a reasonable, likable way.
Right. Yeah, I mean, Peter, those are all great thoughts, and it's funny because anytime if I'm with a client and I'm shooting just a really quick piece of content for them to go on their platform. So one of the things we can all, you know, what's the one thing we always say, like, what's your elevator pitch, you know? And I always say, and, you know, like we're joking before you started recording, but kind of similar to that, where it's like, think of a press release, and people are familiar with the press release and the format of it. If people still do press releases, it's typically the most important information is at the beginning, right? And at the end, it tends to kind of not as important. It's a little bit more fluff, but you got to think about it with the times that we're in with people. Like, we scan, we're much rather watch videos. Even when we watch videos, how much are we watching? I'm guilty personally if someone sends me a video, or a meme on Instagram, chances are if it's a video, I won't watch it, because it's like, oh, how long is this video? That's literally what I ask myself. So exactly to what you were just saying, where it's, if you're at a presentation and you're just, and they say, hey, we got to pivot, you only have about 5 minutes or you only have 2 minutes. So being able to think about it's like, if I have 2 minutes, knowing that I probably need to capture these people in 30 seconds, otherwise I'm going to lose them, making sure that what you're saying from the beginning, those first 30 seconds, is really, really compelling.
Absolutely.
That you don't lose them.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So I think, like I said, I think that's something that can be true, true for again, all of our platforms, whether it's a press release, whether it's a video on Instagram that you're posting, it's a long form video, anything that you do, I always say shorter is better. And that's oftentimes where it's, you don't, when you do what we do, oftentimes, we can't really do fluff. Think about news, the editors and writers who don't have time to read. So we got to make sure in the first, couple sentences of the email that it's actually something that's going to be beneficial for them. And understanding their time is important, that we want them to write about it, but we know that we don't, often have a captive audience, whether it's a good relationship or not. So we got to get people quick. We as consumers and as an audience, we don't have a long attention span. And, I'm speaking from personal experience from being on both sides, how.
Well, let me say, and I agree with you about the length of it. The other thing that has to be considered too is the complexity of the issue. And maybe you might not run across a lot of those, but somehow, and there are some issues that can be complex. So it might take a little bit longer than 5 minutes to completely understand it, because what's worse than is either, you didn't say enough so they still don't understand it, or maybe a little bit longer so at least they get a grasp of what it is, and
exactly,
and so forth. Yeah.
And then also, to your point, but that's why it's important to have always a good call to action, right? So I think it doesn't matter. Again, if you don't have much time, you're like, okay, what are the three, being in your head, whether you're talking, however you're presenting yourself, it's like, what's the call to action? What do I want them to do at the end of this? So again, whether you're in front of people and you let them know, you're like, hey, this is who I am, this is what I do, this is why it's beneficial for you, knowing that but it's like, what do I want them to do? Do I want them at the end of this, if I'm at a conference, do I want them at this end of the conference to come up to me, ask me for more information? Do I want them reaching out to me? It's like, whatever that is, I feel like that's even more important than anything you kind of have in the middle. Because if you can't really get your point out in the middle, at least you're like, okay, well, just call me later, email me later, we can talk about it, further. So I always say who your intro is and maybe who the end part, your call to action.
Well, that makes me think of another thing too, and that is maybe looking in a different direction. And that is protecting one's brand. That there needs to be some specific actions taken depending upon what the issue is, and how do we go about protecting this brand from this information that's incorrect or perception that's incorrect.
Yeah, and I always think so. I've done a good amount of work in crisis communications. It's not my favorite part, but I think it is very much a necessary skill that I truly think all publicists and marketers should have some sort of concept of what crisis communications is. I think where companies get in trouble, Peter, is that they don't actually have anyone, whether on their team or someone on retainer, that has a crisis communications background that is able to kind of step in instantly. Because what's the worst is, a lot of times what happens with companies is that here's a crisis and it's like, oh, we need to find someone. That should not be your next step. Your next step is, we have a crisis. let's activate. It should be you already have your crisis comms team, whether it's the CEO, whoever your C-suite is, whoever your HR, whatever the issue is. But you have your next step should be activate. We have a crisis. Meet in the boardroom, 30 minutes, 15, 30 minutes, and let's go. It should not be we have a crisis. Who can we need to interview and hire people to do this, because now it's getting bigger and bigger, but I think people need to understand. And also when you have some sort of crisis situation, it's not so much what the crisis is, it's pretty much how you respond. It's how your brand responds and how they recover. And that's a good judge of how good of a like overall strategy that you have as a brand. Because again, it's not really like, things happened, but it's really just how you're going to recover. And that's truly what the crisis teams should be in charge of, and what they should be managing. Not so much the crisis that happened, but what are we doing in a week and what are we doing in a couple weeks to kind of just bury that.
Well, that crisis communications it's an important issue for me as well. I mean, I've been in some real heavy duty ones, and I've seen people who sort of thrashing around at them. But the first thing you need to do is have a team, and you need to have a plan that's in place already. And you're right that somebody should have some sort of skills at handling these kinds of things, because I was just talking to someone the other day of when you compare. I was looking at the thing. One is what was it? Cracker Barrel was one, and the other was the seafood place. There were two different things. I mean, they were both crises. The seafood place, I forget the name of it right now, but anyway, they sort of say, "Well, look at we were kind of silly. That was fun, and we were going to fix this. Sorry, folks, it happened. We won't let that happen again. It's our fault. We should have been prepared because we know our food is that good, and we were surprised it attracted so many people, blah, 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 blah." Whereas Cracker Barrel kept trying to defend what they did, even though the wheels kept coming off. And one of the things about these kinds, specifically when you've got a group like that you're going to change something that an audience is exposed to, you need to begin to ask the audience, what do you think about this idea? Before you get out there in the front and do it, because, I mean, they caught hell. The ladies on national television trying to explain how we're going to fix this or why it should be okay. And it still didn't work.
But Peter, that's exactly what I'm saying. Like, why in the beginning, you got to take inventory of who your audience is.
Right.
So I think exactly to what your point was about, hey, let's do a little test before we decide that we are just going to roll this out. I mean, based off of that, it doesn't sound like they did, because it sounds like if they did, I don't think they would have had the response.
I don't think they did either.
That they had.
I really don't.
Yeah. So I would say, again, it's knowing who your audience is and making sure, like, it's okay to ask, because there's plenty of times I've worked on campaigns where we've asked, like, hey, this is what we deem internal, and that's what happens. This is what we deem internally that's important, but then sometimes, what do they say? Perception isn't always reality, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that's why it's important making sure that you're always connected with your audience and just whoever that is and your customer, asking them, what about this? Do you think this? Like, asking them just certain questions about your brand and how they feel, and that gives you a really, really good perspective on your next steps anytime you start doing a campaign. Like I said, I've been part of campaigns where we've done surveys, we sent it out to, thousands of people in different regions, and we're just like, oh, interesting. Okay, that's we didn't think that was, important to you. We thought this could be important to you. So it's very eye-opening, and that's good, because again, end of the day, it's your brand, but this is what keeps people coming back, and understanding and still having that connection with your brand.
Right.
And they feel a part of it too when they feel like they've had a say in it.
Let me also add that too, because you're right that the organization should have a communications plan and someone to oversee that plan to develop. And it's, because matter of fact, I just had a guy on here not long ago, and basically that's what he does. His job is crisis communications. But the point here simply is that you need to have someone on staff that has some idea of what they're doing, hopefully some experience. Yeah. If you're going to need to call outside people, call somebody from the outside that has some experience. Yeah. I would have concerns is that you told me that you sat in a hotel ballroom for a couple of hours and you have a certificate in crisis communications. I don't think I'd be very comfortable with that.
Right.
Because this gets way beyond what it is we were asking you to do.
Yeah, you need someone who has been in the trenches when it comes to crisis communications, right. Where it's kind of like, I tell people all the time, I think it was recently, and someone asked me, they're like, I can't believe you do this. And I'm like, talking about like PR. And I was like, I know, because it's crazy. And I was like, 20 years ago when I started doing this, I lost my like sanity pill, right? Because the fact that we're here today, 20 years later that I've been in, it's just like, but there's something about it, there's something like being in it, being able to problem solve, being able to think, to be always ahead of the game. When someone comes to you and say like, well, what about blah, blah, blah? And you're like, oh, you know what? I actually already thought about that. I thought about that. And I also thought about this. And being able just to always just be, and think about any sort of repercussion, good, bad, indifferent, whatever it is, and any sort of outcome. So I always think, anyone who works in public relations and crisis comms, you got to be slightly off. Again, speaking from experience, but again, it's being able to kind of, again, when you're able to solve something, when you have a happy client, when, the crisis happened, but nobody cares anymore, things like that, where it's like, okay, this is good. This is why I've done it for as long as I did.
Well, Alex, we're sort of running up against close to the end of our time here. Do you have any closing words for our audience about branding?
Yes, I do. And Peter, I want to thank you again for giving me the platform to speak with you today. It was truly an awesome experience. One of the things that I would absolutely leave any brand who is unsure about kind of like what their next steps are. And I go back to the first thing, what you asked, like, what do I do when I'm approached? And again, it's being able to ask those two questions, who you are and why should people care? And I think sitting down and really just like kind of taking that look, being self-aware about who you are and where you are, where you were yesterday, where you are today, and where you're going. I think those are super important things before you decide, hey, I'm ready to bring someone in to take your brand to the next level. I think everyone has a story to tell. I think that's super important. It doesn't matter if you think it's silly. It's just kind of working through those little kinks from the beginning and being able just to kind of put your head down and identify, what it is, that story that you want to tell, and fine-tuning it and fine-tuning your message. I think, like I said, it can do so much wonder, so much great, for promoting your brand and getting yourself out there. And, nothing is instant. Nothing happens overnight. So it is really much like it is it is definitely a marathon. It's definitely not a sprint. So knowing today, like, if someone hears this, whenever they do, and they say like, oh, great, I'm going to start tomorrow. And on Thursday, we're talking today on a Tuesday, but, and say like, great, on Thursday, everyone's going to know. It's like, no, it's going to take some time, especially if you haven't, stepped foot in this world before. So I always say patience is a virtue. People need time. People need time to develop their message and to fine tune and to figure out where things should be. So I always say, like, please be patient with your marketers, with your publicists, with your brand specialists. They trust me. They know time, nobody likes to work as fast or quickly as people who do in our field, in our industry, but knowing that, time definitely, we love it on our side. So with that, I'll leave it.
Okay. Well, Alex, let me say that I really have enjoyed talking to you today, and I think that our audience will, gain a lot from the experience that you've exposed them to and information that you've delivered to them. And let me say, if you have enjoyed the program, we certainly would like to get a review from you. And please let me once again say thanks to Alex Hammond. She's the principal of Brand News, Public Relations. So let me again let your friends know that you've been listening to the Public Relations Review, and tune in for our next edition. Have a great day.
This podcast is produced by Communication Strategies, an award-winning public relations and public affairs firm headquartered in Nashville, Tennessee. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, this is Peter Woolfolk. First, let me say thank you so much for being a listener. Now, I want to alert you to our shiny new podcast website located at podpage.com. However, you can go directly to the podcast site located at publicrelationsreviewpodcast.com. There, you can contact me through email. You can leave a voice message. You can leave a review. You can read an episode blog and frequently learn about the podcast guests. You might also want to suggest podcast topic ideas or even suggest a guest. You can also let me know if you would like to receive our podcast listener logo that you can post on your social media. So I look forward to hearing from you about our new podcast website. Thank you so much for listening to the Public Relations Review podcast, and have a great day.